Okay, well, welcome. Thanks to all of you for joining this webinar, and especially to our panelists. Looks like we have a good crowd. This is the fourth of 7 monthly events for our speaker series commemorating the 125th anniversary year of the Utah State Historical Society. After I'm done speaking here, I'll place in the chat a link where you can access the videos of our previous events, as well as information on upcoming lectures and discussions. I first learned of the Native Places Atlas when John Flynn reached out to me at the end of 2020 for information on a Salt Lake City foothill place name. Later, I asked John to write a blog post on the Atlas, which we published last year. And the idea behind this conversation today is to hear from the creators of the Atlas, as well as to get the perspectives of one of our local tribal voices. The title of our conversation today is Native Places Atlas, an Indigenous Atlas of Utah and the Intermountain West. So I'm going to first turn the time over to Dr. Greg Smoak. He is Director of the American West Center and Associate Professor of History at the University of Utah. He is author of numerous important works, and he's currently the president, now the outgoing president of the National Council on Public History. After he speaks, we'll hear from John Flynn and Darren Perry. John is a PhD student in the history department at the University of Utah. He's a joint graduate fellow with the American West Center and Digital Matters. And Darren is former chairman and current council member of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. He's former Democratic congressional candidate and author of The Bear River Massacre, A Shoshone History. So we have a distinguished panel today. If all of you tuning in have questions or comments for our panelists, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and we'll get to those questions later in the hour. So Greg, go ahead, please.
All right, well thanks, Jed, and I'm glad to be here with Darren and John, and to see so many folks in the audience, many of them old friends I see names of there, so it's really great to see everyone. Yeah, I want to set the context for this map and our discussion today. And John may or may not have his own part to add, but he may jump in here as I talk about the map itself and share the screen and navigate through the map. So just to illustrate some of the things that I talk about. But first, I really want to start by talking about the general concept, the inspirations behind the map, and where we are so far. And so, like, the general concept for this map has been to really decolonize geographic understandings by restoring native place names to the landscape of Utah and to the Intermountain West. And so this initial premise is that map making is an inherently colonial process. Geography is an inherently colonial discipline. It is the way that Europeans and Euro-American colonists made the rest of the world legible. They drew lines, they made these mental images and put them onto paper, and they attached names to places. And in this process, what you find is erasure, right? The erasure of native place names and native history, right? So we think about a place like Utah. We see a mixture of some native names remaining, or at least phonetic representations of particular names like Timpanogos. But in large part, we see the erasure of native names and the imposition of Euro-American names. This is a process that takes place across the continent and around the globe, really, right? The process is managed in the United States by the United States Board of Geographic Names, and here in Utah by an individual committee of state history that handles this, names and name changes in the state of Utah. The Board of Geographic Names was created back in the late 19th century, largely to address problems of conflicting names and spellings that faced map makers as the United States expanded into and control over the American West. It was a bureaucratic solution, and there's this deeper issue of renaming places and erasing Native history that goes back much, much farther. But our starting point, our starting database, though, that we are using are these United States Geographic or Geological Survey official place names, right? So they represent what the United States calls these places. And as I said, this poses a problem because it erases Native place names and erases Native history in the process. Now, the inspiration for the map came from a number of different sources. I started thinking about this years ago, and 4 or 5 years ago, I was putting together a presentation on renaming as part of the struggle over historic commemoration in this country, right? So on one hand, you have the removal of particular monuments, but we've also seen many buildings and places being renamed as part of this process. And I was putting together a presentation for that. And I happened to be talking to Forrest Kutch of the Ute tribe. And I was talking about the renaming of what today is known as Grandstaff Canyon near Moab, Utah, right? And it's named today after William Grandstaff. And many of you know it had a different name before. And I just happened to mention that I was doing this, and Forrest said to me, well, that place had a Ute name before that. And I thought, yeah, so this is maybe a more accurate, more respectful way to name this canyon than it had been in the past. Yet it also doesn't take into account that there was an older place name there. And so that was one inspiration. How do we get at these place names? I'd also seen maps that were created that tried to restore a Native presence by essentially just plastering tribal names onto the landscape. There's a bunch of different projects out there. There's some that are really quite good. There's a website that is a Canadian website called nativeland.ca. And there you see overlapping tribal boundaries, but it still is really blobs on a map, basically, different colors, and they say this tribe lives here, this tribe lives there, right? And so thinking about this, place names seem to become a more important way to do this, to record tribal history and presence. And inspiration here came from the work of Keith Basso, and I think many people here might have encountered Keith Basso's famous, really great book, Wisdom Sits in Places, which is a project which told of a project he did for the Western Apache people. Our project is quite different, but what Basso does in that book is illustrate the ways in which place names aren't just, they just don't commemorate people or events, but they actually record history. They record Native uses, they record events that have happened. His project was much more personal, much more embedded in a single people and in relating place names to their histories. What we're doing is a larger scale process, but I think, I really draw inspiration from that book. I think it's an important way, again, not just to put names back on the map, but to restore Native history and to get people thinking about it. Right? Back to that blobs on the map versus place names, I think place names also more effectively reflect tribal territories and certainly the overlap and the interactions of Native peoples. One of the things that you find in Utah is multiple place names from different peoples for the same place. And I think hands down, the best example of this is Bears Ears. If you take a look at the initial proclamation of the Bears Ears National Monument signed by Barack Obama late in 2018, or late in 2016, right, the very end of 2016, that proclamation begins by essentially saying this was the Ute name, this was the Navajo name, this was the Hopi name, this is the Zuni name of Bears Ears. All of those names still meant Bears Ears, kind of telling that if you've ever driven the highway from Kayenta over to Shiprock and looked north and seen them, they certainly look like bear's ears. But it acknowledged that there are many names for those places, and it reflects shared use, overlapping use, and history. Right? And so one of the things that we find in our map is that the boundaries between people become somewhat fuzzy. And you can see areas that were shared use or conflicted use, right? And so, you know, it puts the map, I think, in a much more you understand tribal territories in a much more complex way, right? And so maybe, John, do you want to share the map at this point? I'll talk a little bit about the structure of the map. All right, so first of all, to think about the structure of the map, I want to point out that our project is not limited to the state of Utah. Right? Obviously, we want Utah to be sort of in the center there. We are a public institution in the state of Utah, and our relationship is mostly with Utah's tribal peoples. But state boundaries are artificial. Right? They mean everything and they mean nothing. They mean everything in the sense that different laws and different regulations may come into effect when you cross that line. But for Native peoples, they're artificial. Traditional tribal territories did not stop at modern state lines, right? And so what we're thinking of here is much more broadly the Intermountain West, with Utah sort of being the center. Down the road, it would be great if we would partner with other universities or other institutions to expand this map across the entire continent. That would be, you know, sort of an ultimate end goal that would be great. Certainly not there yet, right? So the structure of the map extends beyond the state borders. We focus on language groups rather than sovereign nations. And I'll tell you, you know, the reason here is that you know, it brings a little more coherence to the map. It's easier to see. And, you know, these are the five, you see on the left there, the five cultural groups or linguistic groups in the state of Utah. These are not the sovereign nations in Utah, right? There are 8 different sovereign nations. There's the Navajo Nation, there's the Northwestern Band Shoshone Nation. There's the Southern Paiute people, as well as the San Juan Southern Paiutes. There's the Ute tribe of Utah. And of course, there are 2 Goshute bands, the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute Reservation and the Skull Valley Band of Goshute. So, but instead of complicating matters like that, what we do is we recognize that within each individual tile. But to keep the visual easier for people to see, we've gone with color coding of the 5 major language groups. Now, one of the things you can see there immediately is that we have a lot more data for, well, before I move on to that, let me say the other major filter, and John can show us, are physical features. And you can pull that up. We're not actually seeking out the kinds of data that, say, Keith Basso did with the Western Apache people in Arizona, and that is sacred places, you know, personal stories, things like that, that might be sensitive and should be within the control of tribal peoples. Right? We do have a mechanism attached to this database called Merkatu, which was developed by Washington State University, that will allow tribes to share that kind of data or to keep that kind of data on this website, but control access to it. But our first primary goal is not to do those, to record those kinds of things, but really to look at physical features and to take those USGS place names and find out what Native peoples called these places. And so we're focused on physical features first: mountains and mountain ranges, rivers and streams, canyons, plateaus and mesas, you see valleys, lakes, and so on, right? And so what you can do using these filters, the linguistic filter and the physical feature, is find out, say, what are all so here's mountains, and what are Shoshone names for mountains, right? You can limit it that way if you wish, right? And so there you see the Shoshone names we have collected so far for mountains or mountain ranges, right? You can then overlap it by saying, what are the all tribal groups, right? You see where there, and you can also see where the overlap takes place. Okay, so if that makes sense. So the two major filters we have on the map are the language groups and the physical features. Now, back to that point about there is a disparity between, say, the number of Shoshone names you see there and Navajo names and Ute names. And that comes down to available sources that we've used so far and how we've collected names so far. The project was launched just in time for COVID-19 to strike. And so it definitely has delayed the project. Our initial work was to collect as many place names as we could from historic sources and published sources, from place names books and so on. Now, there are some tribal groups have much more information available. The Navajo Nation, for instance, has a great deal of place names. There's several books that record Navajo place names. Less so for the other groups. Tribal consultation becomes crucial at that point. And we have had a good relationship with the Northwestern Band Shoshone Nation. That's why Darren is here today. And that's also why you see so many Shoshone names in blue there on the map. A few years back, the Northwestern Band did its own place names project and collected place names from published sources, from elders, checked published sources against those, the understandings of elders, worked with particular members from the Goshute tribes as well to produce a database of place names, which was generously shared with us. And so that's why, that's been added into this resource by this point. And that's why you see so many Shoshone names here. That type of tribal consultation needs to take place with all Native peoples. And, we're working on creating those relationships and working on expanding this project, principally with the Ute tribe and with the Paiute tribe of Utah, I think, are as you can see here, are the two groups that really need, we really need to work on this in the coming years. So there are definitely gaps on the map. It's a work in progress, but that kind of explains what you're seeing here. Now, what uses can the map be put to? And I think maybe but I don't want to go on too long here. I want to leave time for questions. And of course, Darren has, we want to hear from Darren here shortly. But, I see a number of uses for this map. I mean, one is this general contribution to the state's history, to the history of the American West, that restores or helps to restore a Native presence through place names and through that history. And I think that's sort of this general underlying importance of the map. I also see it being an important educational tool. I've shared the map with folks from UEN, the Utah Education Network, and I've been involved in some of the meetings as they have redesigned the Native American resource page for teachers. I could see this as a great K through 12 teaching tool to teach history, to teach geography, and to teach language. My hope is that tribal peoples can use this as a language preservation tool as well. I know for a fact that the tribe that I worked with in California has done just that. Very small tribe, the Big Sandy Rancheria in Aubrey, California, has used place names and also names of plants and animals as a means to create a primer to teach children Native languages. And place names are as essential in understanding Native history. So I think that they'd be a great addition there. So a language teaching tool. as a heritage management tool. And that's where that Mercatu database program comes in. Hopefully, if tribes become more involved in this, and if they want to use this as a place to protect heritage by storing these place names, by preserving them, they would then have control over them. And by that, I mean only tribal members, only people designated to access that data could access that data. It would not be on public display at all times. It would be up to the tribe to decide which names and which resources they allowed to become public. And then finally, maybe we can become a potential tool for the effort to change inaccurate or offensive place names. I know that currently, there are over 50 places in the state of Utah, and the state is involved in changing these place names currently with squaw attached, the word squaw attached to those place names. We've checked, we do not have in our data right now, we don't have specific names to help out with that effort. If we did, we could. But as we expand our work with tribes and gather place names for more obscure sites, hopefully we will come up with place names to add or help in renaming or even in naming efforts. Jed mentioned that he had first encountered this resource talking to when John, I think, I'm not sure which way it went, was looking for place names like in the Salt Lake City foothills. We were approached by Salt Lake City's Public Lands Department, who's very interested in attaching appropriate indigenous names to areas around Salt Lake City. And I think that that's another, really important potential use for this map. And so I think, I think that provides a pretty good context for understanding, where we're at currently with the map. And I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Darren, who I'm just very interested in hearing from as he talks about the importance of place names and for tribal peoples. Yep, I think you're still muted, Darren. Oh, you're muted.
You can hear me now? Can you hear me now okay?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you. So how did we get here? A place where Native American names, for the most part, have been completely erased from our history. And really, where do we go from here? For hundreds of years, the banks of the Bear River provided a wintering camp spot for many of our people for centuries. Those hopes and dreams, though, were shattered on the morning of January 29th when Patrick Connor attacked a sleeping village. And I always like to say, have you ever had a memory sneak out of your eye and roll down your cheek? I have that all the time when I think about the massacre of my people. But even more than that, I think about how that one event began decades of erasure. Over the years, that site has been a site of honor for us. It's a sacred burial ground. But that battleground continues on even into the 20th century, when the debate continued upon what that place was going to be called. Was it going to be called the Battle of Bear River, which is what the locals and the government wanted, or would it be called the Bear River Massacre? And that debate was important. Just north of Preston, Idaho, if you go there today, there's an old monument on Highway 91. It was erected in 1932. And I think the events that around that share an important historical context of where we are today. And that Battle Creek marker came about during the rise of heritage groups and developing nostalgia for their pioneer ancestry, I think as a way of cultural expression. These heritage groups collected and tended stories of its communities, which ended up forming the core of public history. These stories became the means by which history would be shaped and analyzed as generations discovered their fascinations with the past. The pioneers in this monument allowed ordinary people to celebrate local ancestors by making their relatives almost seem heroic. The story of the Mormon pioneer would become an authentic image that was dependable and resilient for years to come, which has eventually culminated in a state history. But the monument and those who planned it took it one step further, I believe. It was decided that the descendants of Sagwitch, his son Yeager, and my great-grandfather Moroni Timbimbu would be the ones to unveil this new monument. There's a black and white photo that captures our people in full regalia, but it also captures Moroni and Yeager in typical Mormon religious attire, a white shirt and a black tie. Just like the pioneers, the Indians were now authentic symbols of pioneer life, which supported the motivation for these heritage groups to celebrate pioneers as the founders of these new Indian civilizations. My people that were invited to this dedication were now culturally and religiously assimilated into the church. The wayward and savage Indians of 1863 had been culturally transformed, much like the landscape and the place names that the pioneers had set out to conquer. That monument north of Preston, Idaho today strips us of our obligations to find out for ourselves what took place. My dear friend David Lewis said that humans have great memories for what they want to remember. In commemorating this battle, you forget the uglier parts of history and you only focus on the heroism of the soldiers and the saints. And that's the kind of Daughters of Utah Pioneers monument that's there today. It's not a story about the Shoshone people. It becomes a story about the pioneer women and the brave soldiers. And in constructing a monument like this, you firm up memory and you create history. It wasn't enough that they just took our lands. They needed to erase the people, their cultural identity by erasing their names. The pen has done more to erase Native American culture, Native American people, and Native American place than any rifle could have ever done. As 1847 rolls around and large number of saints arrived to the Salt Lake Valley, they didn't arrive to a barren wasteland. They arrived to a landscape already steeped in tradition and culture. It didn't take long, however, for the work of renaming to begin. Places like Wuda Ogwa, Mosodagwani, Nua, Pogowa, Timbanogwa. These began to be replaced by Anglo names like the Bear River, the Cache Valley, Shoshone, Salt Lake, Ogden, or Provo. Native Americans have always used names as a way to transmit the knowledge and experience. In the Shoshone worldview, personal achievements were never emphasized, but the events that that person may have experienced were. Our names and our cultures are very much tied together. If you erase one, you erase all. As you drive today through what was once Shoshone land and country, have you ever noticed how many Shoshone names still exist? I think the current use of Shoshone place names indicates that the language of my people is either declining or non-existent at all. We have almost been completely erased from history. Place names, though, to us represent a connection back to time, to not only blood, but to the stories and life. To name a geographical feature or place with a personal name, which is often done in Western culture, names like the Hoover Dam, Rich County, or cities named after a person, is to say that those people are far more important and have greater value than the land or body of water for which they were named. And that's just not true. That view simply does not fit in Native American worldviews. Place names give meaning to our world. When those names are violent, or racist, or colonist, they perpetrate and recycle the harm that those acts can do. In the last few years, we've witnessed symbols of colonialism and oppression being actively dismantled or torn down with the removal of many Confederate statues. Those images are really easy to see and recognize. But what I've also noticed is that there are other symbols of oppression that are much less tangible than that of a statue. They're Native American names that have been erased. They are cities named after men who today would be considered war criminals. When Western society feels like it may have gone a bit too far and tries to acknowledge Indigenous people in the past, we seem to get it wrong. In 1849 and 1850, there was a conflict with the natives and the people that lived in Utah County. With the murder of Chief Old Elk and the death of his wife, who fell from the mountain peak, it was decided to rename that mountain peak in her honor. So today we call it Squaw Peak. To my Native people, squaw is a derogatory term referring to a female body part. Did you know that the state of Utah references the term squaw 80 times in its literature? My hope is that one day we'll be a little better. How long have we been talking about this? It's time that we do the right thing and rename those places that are offensive to many. And even when a place name might be more benign, they are still problematic if they replaced or erased Indigenous names. You know, when Winston Churchill said that history is only written by the victors, it becomes easy to me why renaming took place. Pioneers came from all over the world to settle Utah. They were eager to make this their home. And so the work of renaming things in their honor became, I understood. After all, it was God's plan, wasn't it? They be here. It was their manifest destiny. So it is possible to think that one day we as Native people might be able to reclaim those names and our place in history. If we do, it will come from a place of collaboration with you, with the state, and with other stakeholders to see how we can work together to make Utah a more diverse and inclusive place. It is vitally important that we place Indigenous history in the same conversation as colonial history, rather than having to choose one or the other. In closing, just a year ago, former Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum said to a conservative student organization, he said this: "We birthed a nation from nothing." I mean, there was nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. Think about that. That isn't acceptable. Views like this still exist. in America today, and they can be a barrier to lasting collaboration. So what's in a name? After all, isn't a name just a name? Who gets to decide what it's going to be called? Why is it important to Native Americans to have authority or agency over that name? And what does it mean for us personally and institutionally? As a Native American leader, I hope that we can take time to reflect on the names. As you go to a beautiful place, I hope you ask yourselves, I wonder what the Native Americans called this place and what meaning is there behind it, because there will always be a story to tell. Place names have always been an important part of our geographical and cultural environment. They identify geographical entities of different kinds and represent irreplaceable cultural values that were vitally significant to Native American cultures. They have always contributed to a people's sense of well-being and feeling of home. We have much work to do, but I think with projects like this, we are having a great start. So thank you, Greg and John, for including our perspective in this whole thing.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Darren. Greg, I was going to go ahead and have, actually, please, Greg, go ahead.
No, I'm happy
okay. What I would like to do is actually, before we get to some questions, I'd like to turn it over to John real fast for a bit more on the site navigation, if you would. And also, I'd love to hear his thoughts on the meanings, significance that he's been able to tease out from this project thus far. I know you've been working on it for some time. So yeah, go ahead, John. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Let me share my screen again. Yeah, so I'll give a little bit more of a rundown on the navigation and the ways we've kind of set it up to explore, and then what I think are advantages and challenges of using a digital tool such as this. Largely, I think the biggest advantage in it being digital and interactive is there are multiple ways for you to engage with it, and it's adaptable. So as Greg was saying, this will continue to grow as we collect more data. So it's live now. I dropped the link in the chat and you're welcome to explore, but the idea is that through collaboration, we will continue to get more names and have it, although we're using ArcGIS, which is not open source, as publicly available and open as we can. So our data is available. So when you are on the site, you'll see this delta at the bottom. If you just click that, it will pull up our spreadsheet that we use with a little bit more fine-grained detail and data. As well, you are able to download our data set. Other than the obvious way of just clicking around to explore, so all these pinpoints will have a pop-up where you have the place name, the language, this will be a translation or notes that are accompanying it, and then the USGS name and then the feature. Like Greg said, we're using these 5 broad categories, but when you do click on these, you'll see this is Eastern Shoshone. Something over here will be Western Shoshone as well. So that's one way to explore, is just clicking on these points to see what pops up. As well, Greg pointed to, you can toggle the features based on what you're looking for, whether it's mountains, rivers, and streams and such. There's also a list view here that will interact when you're doing these toggles. So this has everything on there, but if we go over to our features and do mountains and rivers, you'll see that it automatically updates and it'll give you a numerical value. So we have 231 place names for mountains, mountain ranges, rivers, and streams. And again, you can fine tune that. So we have for Shoshone, 91 place names for rivers and mountains. So the idea is there are multiple ways to find what you're looking for. Additionally, we have a search with the magnifying glass right here. So when it automatically pops up, you can type in most geographic locations, but if you click on the delta arrow, you can search by either the indigenous place name or the USGS name. So if we go to place name and type in just PAH, we'll see that a list will pop up. And if you click on any of these, it will zoom in to that on the map. So again, if you're looking for something specific, you can use the search feature like that. Additionally, there is a proximity you can use. So this button up here will show you any place name in whatever location you set. So I can set this to show results within, let's say, 9 miles. And Greg and I are at the university, so oops. If you click on that, it will zoom in and show that there are 13 place names in our database that are within 9 miles of the University of Utah. Additionally, the other great advantage of using a digital map like this is we can have different layers going on at the same time to explore and show different concepts. So with this layer panel, first and foremost, we can get away from this topographic map we have at the base with the Euro-American names and political boundaries and just go to satellite imagery. As well, we can compare the linguistic presence of the place name points we have with what are federally recognized reservation boundaries. So again, the same way that our data is coming from the USGS, these are USGS recognized federal reservations. And this allows us to see the confines of reservations overlapping or diminishing the presence based on the place names we have. As well, we are incorporating historic maps. As Greg was saying, a lot of these are these polygon shapes that just are overlaid on top of the landscape. And again, we can see that these lines don't actually capture a lot of the actual linguistic presence. So this is a map from 1939. And it's held at the Special Collections of the Marriott. One more element that helps visualize this is, while these are all just diamond-shaped polygons, they represent a lot of different features. So you can toggle in rivers. We click on this, should be the Provo River. It just adds another way to explore this data and visualize this landscape. So in essence, I think these are why these digital tools are really great, because it offers a lot of different ways to think about and understand this and engage with the data that we have, as well as Greg, Jed, and Darren and I were talking about, some of these place names overlap. So those are going to be represented on the map as well. When you see that there's a pop-up that's 1 of 2, that means that there's a similar place name from different languages. Exit that. So that's a pretty brief rundown on using the map. Like I said, it's still evolving and adapting, and that's kind of like the main benefit of it being a digital humanities project. So I'd encourage everyone to explore and reach out, and if you have any questions or comments, to contact us. And like I said, this is inherently a collaborative effort.
Great, John. That was wonderful. We're getting a lot of great comments and just reactions to your presentations. And to that last point, John, if you wouldn't mind just adding in the chat your contact where people can get in touch with you if they have information to share, because that is one of our questions that we've received. I have to ask, because this is part of the Utah State Historical Society's kind of commemorative speaker series. I've noticed just perusing the atlas that a number of the names came from the first edition of the Utah Historical Quarterly, and maybe other editions as well. So that's great to see. It's a great resource, but there might be, some of that early information may not entirely be accurate. So I'd love to have you speak, Greg, about, and this could also be directed to you, Darren. How do you corroborate this information that you may glean from published sources? And maybe this is a larger conversation, but what does the tribal consultation look like? How successful has that been thus far? And sort of what's the process that you go through to corroborate, again, information in published sources?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Darren speak to this. That's the position we're at right now. So that first issue of the Utah Historical Quarterly was very valuable in that, that there was an attempt made to collect Native place names. And we begin with those names and we put them, as a source on the map. But the next step is tribal consultation. And what we do then is hopefully build this relationship. We had a question in one of the chats about, do you work with tribal historic preservation officers? Yes, and cultural offices. That's our point of contact, and we've been trying to set up tribal consultation. Again, COVID and the pandemic has really stopped that in its tracks so far, but hopefully we'll be able to open that up very, very soon. And then work with Native speakers and elders to confirm or to reject those names. And that's pretty much, and I'll let Darren speak, it's pretty much the way the Northwest Band followed that, did their process. A lot of the place names were drawn first from published sources, but then those sources were brought to elders and Native speakers, both within the Northwest Band and within the Goshute bands, to confirm or to reject those place names. So that would be how that process would take place. But I'll leave it to Darren to say specifically how that happened.
No, and let me just add, that's the process set up. We're a sovereign government, so we're sovereign nations. And so it's vitally important that those who want to work with us and other tribal nations go through the process of going through the government, setting up MOUs, just to make sure that everything is above board and you're not stepping on any toes. But I appreciate the efforts when people make the effort to contact tribes. It can be frustrating, I know, because you probably don't hear back from tribal people very often. And so my suggestion would be to stay patient and because the value of working with tribes once you gain their trust and is really remarkable. It's the things that we can accomplish together are really remarkable, but it only happens after you develop that trust. And so we are lucky as the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation. We're one of the few tribes that didn't get moved to a reservation. And I'm not knocking on reservation life at all, but I think our experience is a little different, and we value these relationships with the state and others, and how we can work together to get things done. And so I think that's why there's been such a large volume. You saw a large volume of Shoshone place names. It's because the system has worked in this case with consultation with tribal elders. We take geographical names, take them to elders, and actually there's a fun debate that always goes on within the tribes of elders. And I talked to Patty, our cultural resource specialist, this morning, and she said, Darren, we never called ourselves Shoshone. We were called by where our family groups lived, and mainly by the food source that was there. And so I even learned something new today. We were never called Shoshone. We were called the pine nut eaters, and what that Shoshone word would have translated to. And that's how the Shoshone, that's how those people would have referred to different groups. But consultation is vital to getting the work right. And I think, this map, what a great thing you've done here. John and Greg. I mean, it'll be invaluable for decades to come for people to be able to research this. But like anything else, it's an ongoing process, and it will be only as you consult with and make those connections with each tribe. I can't wait to see, you know, what the Utes have to offer, because that will really add to the layers of that map, and other tribal communities as they see that you only have our best interest at heart, I believe. And so working with you is the key to all this.
Thank you, Darren. Jed, can I jump in? I just might answer a bunch of these questions rapidly. There's a bunch of questions there, and some that I can answer, I think, very, very quickly. For one, people have asked about pronunciations in other media, and the short answer to that is yes, that we do have plans that, you know, as we consult with tribes, to have native speakers pronounce names. We don't want to have these names mispronounced. We also would love to include photographs of sites, historical and otherwise, to bring a visual to that understanding. So yes, on the other media. Question about Native students being involved. The answer to that is yes, we're trying to work on that right now. I'm working with the tribal outreach coordinator here for undergraduate studies at the U, and we'll offer at least one Native student internship here at the American West Center next year. The College of Humanities will fund. The intern would work on outreach generally, but largely on the map, and working with their own people to do that kind of work. I saw one question about consultation with the Mountain Ute tribe, and yes, we are looking to that. One of our partners on this project so far has been not just the Division of State History, but the Division of Indian Affairs. And we did a presentation almost a year ago to Utah tribal leaders, including leaders from the Mountain Ute tribe, and had a bit of a discussion with folks there, and want to follow up on that and continue tribal consultation there. So I did not mention Mountain Ute, but one of those 8 different federally and state recognized tribes. That's the one I did leave out. Sorry about that. Somebody asked about maps for Washington State, and that's sort of outside our initial purview, right? So Kettle Falls and these other places in the Columbia Plateau are important. There is work being done up there. And for instance, my friend, Lori Arnold, who directs Native American Affairs and is an enrolled member of, or directs Native American Studies at Gonzaga and is an enrolled member of the Colville tribe. And other folks have been working on some place names projects there. So I kind of rapidly answered a bunch of questions. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but I'll let Jed kind of moderate here and maybe pick the questions he.
Yeah, I mean, we're receiving a lot of interest. Folks want to know how they can get involved. If they can post this information on sort of educational websites, share it with students. I assume it's a free, publicly available resource. So Absolutely. We want to make that available. How else can folks get involved? You know, Native American students at the universities, how can they go ahead and volunteer as part of this project? How can we get others interested? There's a lot of comments along those lines.
Well, I think that, like I said, having Native students, having an intern's work here at the American West Center, or just be involved in the project would be, I think, one of the great avenues here. And one of the laments I've heard from folks that I've known forever in a lot of different Native communities, especially people who are actively engaged in the preservation of culture and the teaching of culture, is there aren't as many young people involved or interested. And my hope is that, you know, by having younger tribal members involved in this, that they will then be that next generation and carry that forward and get them, you know, directly talking to tribal elders about place names and more broadly about culture and history. If individuals as community members come across sources that may or may not, we may or may not have consulted yet, we'd love to hear about them. The project is public; it's up online now. All of the place names that are there now are ones that have that are coming from the public record. Again, we don't have anything up there right now that includes sacred names or sensitive data. So we would love to have that feedback going forward.
You mentioned somewhat the variations of names that you'd like to track those when there are sort of more than one name. How do you track the changes of names over time? And then indicating, I guess there is a place in your metadata where you indicate where the source comes from, but from the date of a written or an oral source, I mean, those can vary, and I assume that names have changed historically.
Yeah, I mean, names do change throughout history. It is, that's going to be a hard question. Different sources produced at the same time produce somewhat different. I mean, at least the historical sources we have looked at come up with different names. And that's because generally you have Euro-Americans who are hearing particular things, and then they try to translate them phonetically. They try to put down in syllables what they hear. And nobody hears the same thing half the time, right? So we have to be careful with that. So I think the best way that, it would be very exhaustive research to track down and really document changes in a particular place name over time. That might be beyond the scope of what we might do. What we can do is continue to build that database and provide a comparison and provide the groundwork for people to continue this work down the road.
That's really all you can do, because it was never a written language. And so, I've seen my third great grandfather, Chief Sagwich's name spelled 10 different ways from primary sources my whole life. And so when you don't have a written language and you're relying on phonetic sounds, you're going to have different ways. And so it's never going to be exact, but you can certainly look at all of it and get a pretty good picture of what it was. So, and we even debate amongst ourselves and tribal elders on certain areas, and their family may have called it one thing and another family called it something else. So it's never going to be a pinpointed exact science, but at least by doing this, you're acknowledging those first peoples and giving them, to me, you're giving them a voice again, and you're acknowledging their existence, which Native American history is American history. So
that's certainly our inspiration, that last statement, I think.
Darren, I want to go back to you and give you the final word. You had beautiful meditation and reflection on the significance and value of names. They're more than just names. Their identity, their symbols. They create our history. They create our memories. And Greg had mentioned restoration as being a significant goal of this project. I'm wondering what that means to you, and what you could just expand briefly on next steps, where it is that we need to go from here.
I love the word restoration, and Robin Wall Kimmer said restoration. Let's retell the stories of the people that were here. And by doing that, it creates a sense of healing. And so I'm just so grateful that we can come together, academic people and tribal elders, and to finally shine a light on a people that have never had a voice before, never had a seat at the table. And so it's makes me happy to be a part of something like this, because those people that have gone before are so important to us and who we are today, that for once their story gets to be told. And we're now just beginning to recognize those people for who they were. recognized the significance that in their lives, how significant they were, and how going forward in the world that we live in today is divided as ever sometimes. We may have to get back to some of those indigenous ways and wisdoms and to save ourselves. And so very grateful that I've always said that the most successful Native Americans today are those who can best balance culture and change. And we've got to be able to look at the world a little differently and use the values that I've been taught my whole life and use science and what you've been taught and combine it together and collaborate to make this world a better place and a place that we can find healing and that restoration or restoration that we all need. So thanks for allowing me to give our people a voice today.
It's truly an honor. So yeah, I wish we had more time. That's our hour, but it's been an honor to have the three of you speak to us and share us this resource. I hope this isn't the end of the conversation, and I imagine this map with a lot more input, and from the tribes and other sources could really be. I mean, there's a whole lot of other names that could be added here. So I'd like to see that continue to grow and to work together to make what you all have shared, the vision, sort of a reality, and reimagining what this place actually is to all of us. So thank you once again. And again, this is being recorded. If you'd like to share with your audiences from our website, I put in the chat exactly where you can find information on this session and other sessions that we've had as part of our speaker series. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.